Hello and welcome to our monthly multidiscipline webinar hosted by ICAT, ISPI Potomac, and the Professionista LLC. This month's topic is Riding the Fourth Industrial Revolution to Achieve Prosperity and Peace. According to the World Economic Forum, the Fourth Industrial Revolution represents a fundamental change in the way we live, work, and relate to one another. It is a new chapter in human development enabled by extraordinary technology advances commensurate with those of the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. These advances are merging the physical, digital, and biological worlds in ways that create both huge promise and potential peril. The speed, breadth, and depth of this revolution is forcing us to rethink how countries develop, how organizations create value, and even what it means to be human. The fourth industrial revolution is about more than just technology-driven change. It is an opportunity to help everyone, including leaders, policymakers, and people from all income groups and nations, to harness converging technologies in order to create an inclusive, human-centered future. The real opportunity is to look beyond technology and find ways to give the greatest number of people the ability to positively impact their families, organizations, and communities. Now, we'll begin shortly with our presentations from our illustrious speakers, but in the meantime, join us in the chat by providing your full name and where you're joining us from so that we can greet you. So we'd like to welcome and acknowledge Vernell from Atlanta. Thank you for joining us live. It's a pleasure to have you. As well as Jonathan from Colorado Springs and Kimberly from St. Augustine. Great to have you here. Mohammed, hello. Glad to see you here from Silver Springs. And Helena from Burtonsville, Maryland. So good to have you here. Max, so glad that you are here with us today. We look forward to seeing what you'd like to contribute to the chat, and we invite all of our wonderful guests to share your thoughts throughout these presentations. And if you are tuning in live and you haven't already done so, please do let us know your full name and where you're tuning in from in the chat box so that we can greet you as well. Now, this monthly multidiscipline webinar, which we host on the fourth Thursday at noon Eastern Time, is intended for professionals and leaders who want to develop a multidisciplinary awareness of various disciplines ranging from emerging and trending technologies, organizational improvement, engineering, data analytics, social transformation, and other topics. The webinar is recorded and circulated for the benefit of professionals who are within our circle. And for the host of this webinar series, we have ICAT Professional Services. Now, did you know that ICAT Professional Services is a social enterprise with a purpose to enhance employability and create jobs in our community? That's right. ICAT Professional Services is an organization that is committed to making your people and data greater. ICAT Professional Services is your partner for professional development, talent source, data analytics, and societal impact. And service offerings include Career Academy, outsourcing, staffing, and recruitment, applied data analytics, and social enterprise. So to learn more about ICAT Professional Services, please visit www.icatt.net. ICAT offers several credential programs, including the following: CompTIA A+, CompTIA Network Plus, CompTIA Security Plus, and Agile Instructional Design Practitioner. These are signature self-paced virtual programs that are available to help make your people and data greater. And for the career seekers out there tuning in, you may be wondering how, in addition to these credentials, how you can make yourself stand out in a stack of resumes from the other qualified professionals that are vying for the same positions. Now, while credentials and skills may get you in the door, employment readiness is what makes you stand out from other candidates in the minds of interviewers and decision makers. And good news for you, ICAT also offers a series of employment readiness experiences that prepare you to stand out. These courses include certification exam prep, portfolio development, informational interviews, cohort peer support, coaching support, and professionalism development. So if you want to learn more about how ICAT takes a job seeker like yourself and positions you as the highly trained professional that you are, visit www.icat.net. Now, these enriching monthly multidiscipline webinars would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. And so we will now share a few details about the sponsor organizations. And as we share, feel free to take a screenshot of the companies and organizations that you would like to connect with. First, we have ISPI Potomac, our very first event co-sponsor. ISPI Potomac is the professional home for innovative leaders, educators, consultants, and designers in federal, state, and local government, as well as international development, education, non-government organizations around the world. Members of ISPI Potomac share a commitment to community, collaboration, and co-creation to help make our world a better place for all. Our second co-sponsor is the Professionista LLC. The Professionista LLC brings your brand to life with creative storytelling and communication strategies that connect you with your audience. From virtual events to in-person experiences, the company's founder speaks life into your content and your strategy in a way that is compelling, enriching, and memorable. The Professionista LLC provides brand storytelling strategy, communication strategy, empowerment keynotes, and voiceover artistry. So if your organization needs the right voice, a powerful voice to carry your message to your market in a way that makes you unforgettable and makes them want to work with you, text your organization's name and the word voice to 678-694-7763 today. For those of you who are joining us live, you have several webinar tools that you can use to enhance your experience. We invite you to engage in the chat and share any questions, comments, suggestions, and more that you may have. And if time permits, after each speaker, and we're able to open the floor for Q&A, you may raise your hand virtually to ask your question and use the unmute feature to ask your question live if you're called upon. We do ask that all video remains off throughout the webinar and audio remain on mute unless you're called on to speak. Keeping video and audio off helps to keep the focus on the presentation at hand, so we thank you in advance for honoring these standards. Now, if you're joining us from the Zoom mobile app or desktop site, the place to make your presence known is in our chat. Let us know what you think of the webinar in our chat area. We appreciate your feedback on each speaker and each presentation, and we thank you for it in advance. And if you joined by dialing in from a phone, we encourage you to update your Zoom settings to display your name and where you're tuning in from instead of your phone number so that we can acknowledge you. Now let's jump right into the main event. I am Jodianne Bigby, and I will be moderating today's panel on the topic, Riding the Fourth Industrial Revolution to Achieve Prosperity and Peace. Today's multidiscipline webinar features professionals and emerging thought leaders who will speak at length on the topic at hand. First, you'll hear from Kimberly Leonard, Program Manager at ICAT Professional Services, who will speak on developing Fourth Industrial Revolution talent in a new world. She will be followed by Helena Zaina, Data Analytics Specialist, who will speak on using data towards sustainable development goals. Finally, you will hear from Jonathan Tessier, professional performance coach and the leader of this webinar, who will round out the discussion with the human side of the fourth industrial revolution. So let's start with our first presenter, Kimberly Leonard. Kimberly Leonard serves as Program Manager for ICAT Professional Services, overseeing the Virtual Career Academy and a team of instructional designers known as the Dream Team. Kimberly has a bachelor's degree in business administration and marketing from Colorado State University, as well as a master's degree in education and human development from the University of Colorado, Denver. As a licensed teacher, she taught 9th and 10th grade English for 4 years, coaching and training other teachers along the way. As a project manager and instructional designer, Kimberly combines her expertise in business and education to serve her clients every day. Hello, Kimberly. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you, Jodianne?
I'm doing fine. So glad to have you here sharing your expertise as part of this panel. So to get us started, why don't you just give us some food for thought or a little known fact about this fourth industrial revolution?
All right. Well, thank you so much. I was just Googling what are some of the weirdest Internet of Things enabled devices, because that is a big part of the fourth industrial revolution and something that I find somewhat comical here. So I'd love if anyone wants to share in the chat some of the funny, smart solutions you've seen out there, but a couple I'll share. One is a pillow that senses when you are snoring and moves. It moves your head to adjust your airways so that you will stop snoring without waking up. Another one I just found is something that has not been released into the market yet, but it is on Kickstarter, which, if you're not familiar, is a platform for crowdsourcing new inventions. And it's a toaster that allows you to create designs on your phone, and then it will toast that pattern onto a piece of bread. So lots of fun there.
That is really interesting. I could see maybe Apple or BMW branded toast, maybe?
Definitely.
So tell us more about the fourth industrial revolution. What do we need to know on the topic of developing talent in this brand new, brave new world?
All right, thank you. Well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so in terms of introduction regarding fourth industrial revolution talent, as you know from the introduction from Jodianne, the fourth industrial revolution refers to a shift. It's in our world, and it has a lot to do with smart technologies such as artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, as I just spoke to. But there are a lot of additional social implications as well as business implications. And so I'll be covering a little bit about how does this impact the way that we prepare our workforce, including employees that we already have, because it's really important that we are remaining agile and that we are able to adapt in a way that sets up our own staff for success. So the fourth industrial revolution, as well as just recent world events, has really created a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous business environment. I want to talk to you today a little bit about this idea of dynamic capacity. Professor Stephen Wyatt, in his book called Management and Leadership in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, touches on this term. And really, he describes it as a hunger to be rather than a comfort with the as is. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask you all for your input, because I believe we all can relate to seeing how different businesses have either adapted or have failed to adapt in recent months and even over the last year and a half, with different factors like COVID involved and other moves toward faster and more virtual platforms. we're seeing that those who are able to adapt are the ones who are going to excel. And we want to make sure that we're setting up our talent to do that as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So the World Economic Forum 2020 Future of Jobs report estimates that between 2020 and 2025, 85 million jobs will have been displaced. However, they also estimate 97 million new roles will emerge as there are new relationships being formed between humans, machines, and automation. So I know we are all familiar with the idea of automation displacing jobs, but again, the opportunity here is that there are also new roles being created. And truly, I believe there are new roles that we have not even thought of yet, because as we continue to innovate and as new technologies emerge, the way that we do our work will continue to change. And those who are able to anticipate those changes are going to be the ones who innovate along with that and are able to create new jobs as well as form new solutions. So really quickly, these two words, upskilling and reskilling, are continuing to pop up for me in conversations as well as articles I read online. So could you all share really quick, either raise your hand, put a smiley face or a thumbs up if you have heard the terms upskilling and or reskilling.
Yes, to our live audience, we'd love to hear and to see, I should say, in the chat, how many of you have heard these terms, maybe in conversations at your workplace or even in your own perusal of Google and publications online. Well, Jonathan has shared that he has heard of upskilling in the workplace. So we have at least one. Anyone else familiar with these terms? Or anyone who this is your first time hearing these terms or seeing them? We'd love to hear from you as well. I know for me, this is actually my first time seeing these terms, but I could certainly understand a need for them in this new world of technology, especially with the shifts that we've witnessed just in the past 2 years. Nardos has also shared that first timer there, Vernell, has never heard this term before, and says thanks for sharing. So there are several of us who are learning something new here.
Wonderful. Well, that's music to a teacher's ears. So I'm relishing this moment to share with you all. So the idea here with upskilling and reskilling, one example is companies who are moving into a more cloud-based system for managing their data. What they need to do is they need to retrain their technicians to be able to work in a virtual environment and to manage that data in a new cloud-based platform. So the idea here is to upgrade or reskill your workforce's skills in order to make them capable and adaptable to the changes that you're making to your own technology as an industry or as an organization. So really it's beautiful to see when an organization is willing to invest in their current workforce rather than simply replace them or look for an alternative that would change that environment. In this case, it's not only a great thing to really protect and appreciate the loyalty of your employees, but really it's becoming absolutely crucial, necessary, because these changes are required, and the need for them, I would say, is able to quickly outpace what we have, the supply. And so even going out into the newly released members of the workforce, those who are just coming out of college and have up-to-date training, even that in some cases is not fast enough. So we have to make sure that we are being agile in what are we needing and how are we preparing as quickly as possible. Let's go to the next slide, please. And we had a question here in the chat that I want to make sure I don't skip over. So Gabe had said that it is an optimistic view to say that we are not displacing. What are attendees on this call doing to position yourself and your organization to create new possibilities and maybe not be displaced? I think might have been the end of that question.
Yeah, so for those of you who are attending live, we'd love to hear from you, particularly in your field, in your industry, in your company, in your organization, what are you or even some of your colleagues doing to position yourselves, position your organization to create new possibilities and not be displaced? Vernell has said, learn in all caps, and I agree wholeheartedly.
I agree as well. Thank you, Vernell, for sharing that. And we're going to touch on that in just a second. I actually heard from a participant in one of the trainings we offered this morning who said that she is now retired, and yet she was attending a training on math because she wanted to stay sharp in those skills and continue to learn, even into the later years of her life. So being a lifelong learner is something that will naturally set us up for success whenever we are pursuing.
Yes, and actually Max has also commented, left a wonderful comment that the challenge is developing competencies that can be leveraged to achieve current and future accomplishments.
Yes, that is so key. And that is another thing that we will touch on in just a second. Thank you, Max.
Another suggestion from the chat or another practice is to practice. Nardos has shared that as a way to avoid being displaced and to create new possibilities.
Great. Well, so the next thing I wanted to kind of point out, and I think again, this is intuitive, but we need to remember that the pace of adaptability has quickened. So even in our efforts to innovate today, we have to be aware that the need to innovate is only going to become more and more pressing. And so in terms of why we develop Fourth Industrial Revolution talent, we need to acknowledge that the more we invest into our talent, the more well-rounded and resilient our workforce becomes. And that leads to improved performance, which leads to a more agile business. If we invest in our people, we are setting them up to look for opportunities to innovate. And really that lends itself toward the idea of psychological safety as well. We need to make sure that we are creating a culture that encourages innovation, but that's a lot easier said than done. And if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of the time innovation requires us to risk. It requires us to try something new. And although that is hard, it is becoming more and more crucial. Along with that, the idea of rethinking from top to bottom is something that I would encourage us all to do in any capacity where we lead. If we want others to be willing to innovate, then we have to be willing to model that. And we also have to think about at every level of the organization, how are we being agile? That can be at the highest level, which might be the strategy and the vision of the organization, all the way down to the smallest operational efficiency. What are we doing to make our processes quicker? What are we doing to enable new technology to save us time and free up our resources so that we can invest into up and coming opportunities? One example is in customer service. If we invest in allowing our sales and marketing teams to train in using new technology, one example of that is enterprise resource planning systems. This can allow them to track customer interactions and gain insight, which will help them build better customer relationships. Studies have shown that loyalty, especially in the newer generations, millennials and newer, there's a greater need for people to understand the brand identity, and they're more likely to be loyal when they see that a brand sees them as a person and is willing to customize service, especially in terms of how they reach out to them, how they promote unique products to them. And so you may have noticed, I know I notice all the time, I will get targeted emails from Target where they will bring up products that I may have looked at in the past. They'll send me coupons for specific products that I have purchased in the past. And so examples like that come from the use of smart technology. And we can only take advantage of that if we're willing to invest into how it works and making sure that our workforce takes advantage. Let's go to the next slide, please. And so finally, in terms of the how, so we have recognized that there's a need for developing fourth industrial revolution talent. We've talked about just a few of the possibilities. The possibilities are endless, but it's all about creating a mindset in terms of what can we do to set ourselves up for what is new out there. Because the truth is that even if we train on everything that's available today, which that would be impossible, but even then, there's going to be something new tomorrow. So how can we establish a mindset that encourages us and our workforce, whoever is involved in our organization? We want to be on the same page in terms of knowing that I need to be on the lookout and really be courageous and bold to go after what is new and bring that to my organization. So how do we do that? So this idea of just-in-time learning or learning in the flow of work is becoming more and more of a trend in training. Because again, I mean, truly, if a training program is enacted and then it becomes obsolete the next month, well, suddenly it has no value. So how can we continue to adapt training to be more and more integrated with the work that we're doing? Because then we can immediately begin to apply something. And if that's the case, then even if the training that I do today, if I'm applying it today and it becomes obsolete tomorrow, at least I was able to use it immediately. Now, this behavior change requires, again, the mindset shift. So how do we start? We start with motivation. So employees need to know how their job is changing, and they also need to be able to see what opportunities are available to reward their willingness to grow, learn, and change. So of course, everyone wants to know that their job is secure, but also where are opportunities that they can grow and what can they see as a reward? How is your organization rewarding those who are willing to take that risk and to put a new idea on the table? If we can celebrate that risk and showcase that reward, it encourages others to take those same steps. Next is smart and adaptive learning. So this is actually something that we talk about here at ICAT as a training provider, but more than 70% of HR directors are disappointed with the return on their investment in training. And that happens because there is no one size fits all in training. So the more that we can take on this idea of smart learning and how we can tap into the audience and adapt on the fly, we're going to be more successful in teaching the different people who attend trainings. Artificial intelligence opens the door for more adaptive and personalized learning, but it requires training in order to use it effectively. Application, I touched on this a little bit, but the idea again is that it has to be immediate. So there has to be a way for the person who is being trained to recognize the opportunity to use what they've just been taught. Then they also have to have the courage to try it. And then they have to reflect on how it worked and refine their approach accordingly. So again, not only do we have to train on new skills, but we also have to establish a process of follow-up and critical thinking where we invite people to not only try it, but also to reflect on how it's working and adjust. And finally, we touched on this a little bit, but the idea of creating a culture of learning and self-improvement has to start from the top. And really, it has to be carried all throughout the organization. So some examples of visible commitment to learning can be included in strategy meetings where the idea is asked or ideas are requested, including learning participation requirements in performance discussions and reviews. That provides accountability as well as an opportunity to celebrate when someone has learned something new and applied it on the job. And again, senior leaders can role model this by attending training, sharing what they've learned, enacting it, and it just creates that culture to celebrate learning outcomes. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Jodianne and any questions that may have come up in the chat.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. We do have some questions and commentary from our live attendees. First from Teresa, who has a question about upskill versus reskill. She says, would you say upskilling is the process of learning new skills or of teaching workforce new skills for change in a current role/environment? And that reskilling, on the other hand, is the process of learning new skills so that you can shift or do a different job, not be displaced in order to do a different job. What are your thoughts, Kimberly?
I think that I agree with what you're saying, Teresa. I am following here because we've got a lot of skills and upskilling and reskilling, they all sound very similar, but I really appreciate the differentiation you're making as far as reskilling is learning new skills so that you can shift or do a different job. I think that that is key because again, with the example I shared about moving data systems into the cloud, you have people who are going to be doing a different job in the sense that the platform and the tools that they have been using in the past are completely different. So in that way, it could even be considered a new job. However, you don't want to lose the existing talent that you have. And so you are simply shifting them from one job description to the other, and that requires new skills. In terms of upskilling, I'm taking a look at what you're saying. So yeah, I would say that it has to do with how can we improve the capabilities that we have. And upskilling can involve new technologies, new methodologies, but in my mind, it's upgrading what is available to us. And so it might relate more to even the traditional sense of training, but just being very intentional about how can we improve our capabilities for the future.
Great response. We also have a statement from Max in response to the question on this final slide of yours of how, and he suggests to predict what future roles will be and prepare to fulfill those roles. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, predicting the future is a challenge, but again, I would emphasize the need to create a safe space for your workforce to innovate, because I think that we have a natural tendency to wonder about the future. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that science fiction is such a popular genre for movies and books. You know, it's fun, but it's only fun when you feel like you have that opportunity and that safe space to be creative. So the best we can, we want to try to anticipate what is to come and how we can set ourselves up for that.
All right, and our final question from Gabe about the smart tech. He asks, how does this smart tech advance peace and prosperity?
Great. Well, I'd love to open that up to anyone on the call because I think Gabe's comment before that as well is a really good point, that this is an opportunity and a place where we can share horizontal knowledge and insights. So any thoughts are welcome.
Wonderful. So we can return to that question at the end of the webinar. Thank you, Gabe. And thank you so much, Kimberly, for your insights and just sharing from your position, your expertise on this topic of the fourth industrial revolution.
Thank you.
So next, our next panelist is Helena Zaina, data analytics professional and contributing member of ICAT's data analytics team. Helena is a graduate of Stony Brook University, where she obtained her bachelor's in applied mathematics and statistics. With a passion for health and improving lives as her motivation, Helena has used her talents to combat inequality in our society and improve the lives of others in ways such as her research at the illustrious A&G Foundation, where she uncovered key findings that showed health inequities in the state of Minnesota. Currently, she is supporting researchers at Broad Street with her data analytics skills in the fight against COVID-19. Welcome to the Multidiscipline webinar, Helena. So glad to have you here today. How are you?
Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Jodianne, and thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So yes, share a little more about who you are, what you do, and maybe a little food for thought as we get into your topic today.
Yeah, so I am a recent graduate of my bachelor's in applied maths and statistics, and I'm very interested in health, and hopefully I'll pursue my MPH very soon. With that said, my presentation would be about how we use data in the sustainability development goals, which are to be achieved in 2030, as we'll see in my presentation.
Wonderful. All right, let's
Next slide, please. Yes. So the fourth industrial revolution. I'll start with a question, an easy question for you. What comes to your mind when you hear the term fourth industrial revolution? Anyone. Could be anything. What comes to your mind?
Yes, so our live audience, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. What comes to your mind when you hear the term fourth industrial revolution? Nardos says change.
Wonderful. Change, yeah.
Anyone else? Yes, when we think of the fourth industrial revolution, we think about even how the first, second, and third transformed the world. So the fourth must mean significant change. Gabe has shared automation.
Perfect.
Teresa says AI, artificial intelligence, comes to mind for her.
That's very wonderful.
Yes, Max has said intelligent automation.
Correct. Yes, technology, digitization, automation, AI. These are the concepts that come to our minds whenever we think of the fourth industrial revolution. And what's behind these concepts and what is basically the backbone of the fourth industrial revolution, I would say, is data. Because data, okay, what is data? What comes to your mind when you hear the word data?
So for our audience, one more for fourth industrial revolution, Danya has said cleaner energy comes to mind when she hears that term. But for the next term, we'd love to hear from you. Abdul Malik has said technological or industrial revolution. Industrial is what we're speaking on, Abdul Malik. Jonathan has said when he hears the word data, he thinks Star Trek.
Right.
And I'm sure fellow Trekkies feel the same. Anyone else? What comes to mind when you hear the term data?
Machine learning.
Teresa has said machine learning. Funnily enough, for me, I think about Don't laugh, or you can if you'd like to. When I think of data, I think about when I had my first cell phone and I had to pay for data, a lot for data. That's one form. Muhammad has said research. Max has said evaluation. Gabe, the interconnecting world. Abdul Malik has said AI, ML, and big data. So machine learning, artificial intelligence.
Those are great responses. Yes, data is all of this, and it's your facts, it's your numbers, it's your intelligence structured in one way or the other. And thank you so much, everyone, for contributing. Next slide, please. So data. I have a very interesting fact for you here. So 90% of the data that we currently have, it has been created in the last 2 years and is projected to increase by 40% annually. Those are huge numbers. And the world's capacity for storing information has roughly doubled every 14 months since 1980. So there is a huge trend that's coming to data, and that is intertwined with the fourth industrial revolution. And apparently, this exponential growth is going to continue in the future, as we've seen in the past, because data is the backbone of the industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution, and data is the future, to be frank. Can we go to the next slide? Right. So the fourth industrial revolution and data, how is this related to peace and prosperity? Well, when we talk about peace and prosperity, we talk about economic development, conflict resolution, terrorism, and all of that. And especially when it comes to our world, there is a prominent organization that is working just for this, and that is the UN. And one of the goals that the UN has set for us to be, for the world to achieve by 2030 is the Sustainability Development Goals, which is shortened to SDGs. So what are the SDGs? These are simply 17 goals that that the UN expects to fulfill to achieve by 2030. And we'll see what those are in a moment. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for playing that video. Like you see, the 17 goals that the SDG is trying to achieve, these goals are basically they're trying to establish peace and prosperity in our world. You see, they have goals for having equality when it comes to food security, for peace, for fighting against poverty in general. And the SDGs is basically trying to fight the wrongs that our world is currently facing, and fight against inequality and also terrorism, and generally establishing peace and prosperity in our world. So how is data used to achieve these goals? We'll see that in a moment in the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So the UN, they have this on their website where they show how they use data and data science, big data, in order to achieve these 17 goals. And but this is just a little bit of it. Data does a lot more than this, what is written over here. So for all the 17 goals, you can see data being used to achieve these goals. For instance, if we see peace, justice, and strong institution, we see sentiment analysis of social media, which is a hot topic in the data science community. It's where you analyze text, social media, comments, feedbacks, just you have a bunch of text and you analyze the sentiment, and that is done automatically. And that is data being used in the fourth industrial revolution. If you see for quality education, citizens reporting can reveal reasons for student dropout rates. So you use this data to make decisions so as to enhance quality of education. You can see in order to reduce inequality. Here, the UN uses speech-to-text analytics on local radio content, and they reveal discrimination concerns and support policy response. So this is, again, it's the future. This is what is leading the SDGs to be met, to be achieved, so as we have a better world. Gender equality analysis of financial transactions, for zero hunger, crowdsourcing or tracking of food prices. Just for all of the 17 goals and for more, data is used. It's the backbone. It's the evidence that bases the decision of this huge success that we aspire to see in the future. Next slide, please. So like I said, data is the lifeblood of decision-making and the raw material for accountability. And we see data being used in the SDGs, starting from the planning of the SDGs to the execution and also evaluation of the SDGs. So the SDGs, the concept was born in 2012 after evaluating the Millennium Development Goals, which were similar goals that were to be met in the millennium. So the MDGs, they were evaluated, and then the data that the United Nations had was used in order to plan the SDGs, the 17 goals. And when the execution, we've seen how we're using satellite images or financial analysis, all those data being used in order to meet these goals, right? And for the evaluation, actually the UN has 247 indicators in order to measure the milestones and the success of the SDGs. So data has its footprints all over in order to meet this 17 goals that leads us to better peace and better prosperity for our world. Next slide. While data is very powerful and very the lifeblood, like mentioned in the previous slide, there are some challenges that come when we talk about data and using data to achieve the sustainable development goals. So the first one is privacy, not just for the SDGs, but for using data in general. Privacy is a huge issue because data is very powerful. Data is the lifeblood, but sometimes if it resides in the hands of the bad guys, it could lead to devastation. So privacy it's a huge issue. It could be another title for another presentation, but privacy should be taken into account by the government, by the UN, and even by organizations that are using and working towards achieving peace and prosperity. The next one is access to data. So while we have access to data in mostly the higher developed countries, data collection in low-income countries is difficult, and sometimes you may not have access to the internet. So there has already been a gap to measure between the high-income countries and low-income countries. There's already a gap when it comes to achieving the SDGs because of the lack of data and sometimes access to data. And another one is open data is it's the very good, the number one source for achieving the SDGs. And sometimes open data may not be available because the government may not put it out there. So access to data could hinder the SDGs, and not only the SDGs, but also generally when it comes to, if there are some researchers here, you understand sometimes access to data is hindering research or even day-to-day activities of businesses, because sometimes people may not be willing to, for instance, respond to surveys. So these are some of the challenges that I wanted to raise on this topic. So with that said, I will conclude my presentation saying data is very powerful, and if we use our data wisely, we can meet higher goals, just like the SDGs are using data in order to make our world better, more peaceful, more prosper. We can also use data to plan, to execute, to evaluate our day-to-day lives to have a peace and prosperous lives for ourselves too. With that said, I'm open for any questions.
Thank you so much, Helena, for the thought-provoking presentation. And yes, at this time, we will open for questions. In fact, well, we have a question from Gabe, and then we have a response to one of Gabe's previous questions. We'll start with the question at hand, which Gabe says, we have powerful data and technology tools to do good in our world. How do we keep such powerful resources out of the hands of the bad guys who are trying to do us harm?
That's a very good question. So at different level, if we see the higher level, the government should be very wary of data privacy. They should work on keeping their data private. And when we come to business levels, they should also work on having a stronger data encryption, or there are many ways to keep your data private and secure. So giving more emphasis on data security and privacy at different levels is very important. And when we come to daily lives, like as individuals, we can be, like, for instance, it could be using like Google Incognito. Whenever you put your data out there, just make sure that your data is private and that you trust the organization or whoever you're giving your data to. So that way we can keep our data private and secure and not in the hands of the bad guys.
Absolutely. Now, Gabe did also ask a question earlier that we want to acknowledge because we do have a response from the audience. And that question was, how does smart tech advance peace and prosperity? So we'd love to hear from you first, Helena, and then we'll share what our audience member has said in response to that question as well.
Yes, data is, I'll say it for, I don't know, for the 10th time right now. Data is the backbone of peace and prosperity and the fourth industrial revolution. And we can use technology and specifically data in order to make evidence-based decisions. So sometimes we decide in our daily lives, and sometimes on the higher level, policy is made based on decisions, correct? But if that decision is not backed up by data, then there's no scientific way of proving what we're doing is right, or our outcome would be the way we wanted it to be. So to answer the question in regards to data, always back up your decisions with your data. Always use your intuition and judgment, but also back it up with your data so that you make a decision that that makes the outcome the way you wanted it to be and get to your goal. And that way, peace and prosperity can be achieved at different levels.
Thank you for that. Now, from our audience, in response to the same question, which was, how can smart tech help us to secure peace and prosperity in the world? Vernell shared that it will bring wealth and prosperity because collaboration brings people together to create. As we all learn new ways to do old and new things, the process will eventually put us on the same page in a variety of ways, which creates unity. The new knowledge would bring wealth as the information is shared with larger organizations, industries, and companies, etc. And as we all learn new ways to do old and new things, the process will eventually put us on the same page in a variety of ways. Thank you for that, Vernell. We always love it when our audience members share their thought leadership as well. So, and thank you so much, Helena, for sharing your thoughts just based on your work in your field of data analytics. And next, we will hear, excuse me, from the third and final panelist, Mr. Jonathan Tessier, professional performance coach and today's webinar leader. Jonathan Tessier is an accomplished professional with 20 years of success in the field of training and employee development. He has helped lead teams in developing large-scale educational programs from ideation through implementation. He is also a skilled professional coach with a proven ability to generate transformative change in the relations of individuals, project teams, and departmental staff. Hello, Jonathan. How are you today?
Jodianne, how's it going? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So glad to have you. So tell us, something, a little food for thought or a little known fact to get us started on the human side of the fourth industrial revolution.
Well, that is a great question. And as I was thinking about that, I decided to kind of just broaden it from the fourth industrial revolution to just the industrial revolution as a whole. And I wanted to share this, what I found. When you think about the industrial revolution as a whole, it started in Great Britain and then it spread to the rest of the world. And I'm highlighting Great Britain because what I found was really interesting is back then when the Industrial Revolution first began, children were a part of the labor force. And of course, the British government was like, we need to have some laws and reforms in place to protect the children. And I found this sort of amusing when you look at this from our world today. The first reform came out of the British government. It was called the Factory Act of 1833. And this is what the act stated in terms of children working in factories. So are you ready for this? Children 8 and younger could not work in factories. Children between 9 and 13 years of age could work no more than 9 hours a day. Children between 13 and 18 years of age could work no more than 12 hours a day. And no child could work at night. So next time you're exhausted after 8 hours, remember that children still had 1 more hour to go back in the early 1800s.
Wow, that really shifts the perspective, especially when you think about how much time children these days spend more so on social media than they do actual work. Wow.
Exactly.
Thank you for that.
Exactly. So
Definitely food for thought.
you're quite welcome. All right. So I wanted to talk about the fourth industrial revolution from the standpoint of human capital. And if you go to the next slide, when we talk about human capital, the approach that I really wanted to look at when we're talking about human capital is this idea that, number one, human capital creates innovation, right? So this human piece, I think we all get worried a little bit when we first hear about innovation and automation and robotics and all this artificial intelligence that we speak about. And we tend to think that, that's going to replace people. And true that a lot of robotics and automation may be replacing very repetitive, dangerous sort of activities. At the heart of it all is still human capital. And if we don't have that, it doesn't matter what we have in terms of fancy machines and automation and sophisticated programming and all of that. It's the human being that creates the innovation. And that's where we have to keep in mind that this is a key factor. It's always been a key factor, but now in the fourth industrial revolution, it's becoming even a more significant factor for organizations who want a competitive edge. So we've got to keep that in mind when we're going to talk about any kind of industrial revolution. Now, I'm going to show you what some of the other industrial revolutions were, but just real quickly, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, I want to emphasize some of the things that we're used to now in our lives when we think about it. And a lot of that is the digital transformation that has taken place as a result of the fourth industrial revolution. So next slide. Now think about this digital transformation in your life. Think about all the ways that this digital transformation has had an impact on our lives. And you've already heard things like smart technology and artificial intelligence, and some of these things work behind the scenes, and we may not be fully aware of how they've impacted our lives. But we start to realize that some of these things we take for granted, like just for one example, our smartphones, is huge with regard to that digital transformation. And even think about what we're doing right here, right now. This is an example. This learning that's taking place, this webinar, is a prime example of remote communication and learning that is a result of that digital transformation. And I want to emphasize just for a little bit the idea of education and employment and organization. Since my background is in education, I think it's very significant to call out the impact that the fourth industrial revolution is going to have on education and therefore on organizations who will be hiring individuals that are being educated. So under these conditions, I want you to understand that there is a shift going on where we can no longer just get an education, have some knowledge, and that's it. We're really going to have to look at professional qualifications, and we're going to have to look at how we can continue to develop ourselves over our entire lives, because it's going to move pretty fast here with all these revolutions that are going on. So let's take a quick step back in time and look at the 1, 2, and third revolutions that came before this fourth revolution. And so if you could go to the next slide, I want to play a quick video for you. So what's significant about that video is the speed at which these changes are coming. And we really got to emphasize this word revolution. When we think about revolution, we tend to think about it in terms of a war or overthrow of some sort of government. And that meaning can apply to the world around us. These revolutions come and there is innovation that really flips everything upside down. And that flipping is happening quicker and quicker and quicker. So just to highlight again, the first industrial revolution, really that steam engine in the 18th century really brought on large-scale industrial production and transportation. And that's what really drove that first industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution is that whole idea of electrical energy, right? That ability to have electric lamps, a phonograph, internal combustion engines, assembly lines for production, had a huge impact on the world that was created from about 1870 to about 1915. And then the third industrial revolution took place over quite a number of years, but it all had to do with this massive spread of computing that started in the 1980s and went into the 1990s. And you know, we are all impacted by personal computers and the internet. We're hard pressed to find people who are not connected to the internet and don't have a personal computer. And of course, that all leads us to this fourth industrial revolution where we're seeing artificial intelligence and wireless communication and automation and robotics. And all of this is having a huge impact on learning. I mentioned a moment ago that it's requiring us to think about learning from a lifelong perspective, and that you as a professional, if you want to remain competitive during this fourth industrial revolution, really have to think about your constant updating of qualifications, especially in this digital transformational environment that we find ourselves in. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about the, oh, go ahead, next slide. Okay, thank you. So when we're talking about this fourth industrial revolution, number one, we have to realize that it has the opportunity to enhance many things in our everyday lives. And we don't need to dwell on that. You already know what those things are. You can see those innovations in your smartphone, in the way cars look today, and many of the things you saw in that video that I just showed you, right? But when we're talking about it from the perspective of education, we really need to shift our thinking from knowledge and skills to competencies. Key competencies are really going to become important for the development of innovative products and technologies. And that's something we need to really think about when we think about the fourth industrial revolution. And the learning process and the way we access learning is all going to have a huge impact. So again, look at this online training that we're doing here right now. This wasn't thought of 20 years ago, right? But now it's becoming so commonplace for us, right? So when we're talking about education, let's first look at some challenges here, okay? There's a challenge that's key for teachers, and that is that they are going to see an increase in their workload, and some really experienced teachers may experience some displacement because they have not kept up with the required levels of this digital transformation competence that is becoming so important. For students, the increase in information that's offered to us as a result of this revolution can really lead to information overload. And in our attempts to deal with that overload, we can simplify things that may not be beneficial for us. For example, we tend to now simplify interpersonal communications, and that's not good. So we got to be aware of these things when we're shifting from just knowledge and skills to competencies for both the teacher and for students. And then the other thing we have to really keep in mind is that as we get to a global education market, there's only a few large companies that are providing the platforms for that education. And that can raise some concerns if we don't have enough competing interests in the marketplace. We can get things like censorship going on where only key messages or the right messages are allowed to be shared versus all different kinds of voices that need to be heard. But on the positive side, in the next slide, we can think about everything that's going on in the Industrial Revolution as a huge opportunity for those groups of people that we don't necessarily think have much opportunity. So think about some vulnerable categories of our population. People with disabilities, right? Women with children, young people. This digitalization and all that's offered through it can allow these individuals to join the labor market in ways that previously they wouldn't be able to do that. There's an example in developing countries of Ghana and Uganda where smartphones, mobile internet, and some sort of electronic payment system can actually allow these disadvantaged populations to join the marketplace like anybody else. So if you have that competency around the digital transformation that's taking place, you can become an entrepreneur in this industry and in this field. So keep that in mind as we move forward. The other challenge that I want to highlight for just a brief moment is this idea that we need to make sure that the educational programs are in alignment with the expectations of employers who will be hiring graduates from those educational programs. And so there's an urgent need to adapt curriculum to what is evolving in the marketplace. And sometimes education can be a little slow to respond to what the marketplace is needing. All right, so next slide. I've mentioned a couple times the idea of competencies, and most experts in our modern competitive world and the researchers are identifying 3 key competencies. So the first is professional, second is social behavioral, and the third is technical, or as we've been using the term, digital. These competencies are going to be very critical as we move forward, positioning ourselves in this fourth industrial revolution. So it's rapidly happening, so it's not something to sit back on and just say, yeah, I'll get to it someday. It really needs to be something we do now. Organizations and governmental agencies have to increase the cost associated with retraining people, but also us as professionals that may or may not enter the marketplace for employment, we've got to be aware of these things as well. Next slide. So in conclusion, what I'd like you to keep in mind is that human capital is still key for creativity and all the innovation that's going to take place regardless of any revolution. It is a key factor in being competitive, and that we need to think about regularly increasing our competencies to make sure that we're staying competitive in the modern world. Really, there's a focus on digital transformation and the impact that this is having for e-learning, for remote communications, even remote things like medical care are now happening, right? And that we need to be staying up to date as much as we possibly can as a result of that. And because why? There's a growing demand for professionals who can create and can service in a digital environment brought on by that fourth industrial revolution. So keep that in mind as we move forward, because things are going to move faster and faster, all right? With that, I'm just going to say thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present on this topic.
And thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. You always bring some powerful insights to these webinars, and we certainly are enriched by them. And so at this time, we will now open up the panel for questions. So every panelist that has presented today can answer the questions that are put forth in the chat. And we invite our live audience to submit your questions in the chat so that our panelists can share a bit more of their expertise on this exciting topic. So what are your thoughts? We actually have some commentary from Gabe in the audience, who says that people remain central to all of these amazing developments. So we celebrate people. And Nardos has expressed gratitude, saying thanks to you, Kimberly, Helena, and Jonathan. Well, we thank you, Nardos, and every other attendee, whether live or on the replay, for lending us your ear. We have additional thanks from Abdul Malik on your presentation specifically, Jonathan, and Teresa as well. Do we have any questions on either Jonathan's presentation specifically or from our previous presenters? Now is the time to ask. Okay, we do have a question that will be asked live by Teresa. And Gabe has shared that this was excellent presentation and fantastic moderation. You're so very welcome, Gabe. Now, Teresa, we'd love to hear from you live. What is your question?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all three presenters, and thank you, ICAT and Gabe. And it's just been a great experience for me on my end. A question about Jonathan's presentation, and in particular to competency-based education. Jonathan, like you, I've spent a long time in education and largely higher ed. I really feel there's a mismatch in the ideas that you're presenting to what higher ed is offering. That is not new information. I'm sure you will probably agree with me on that. I just wanted to ask you, go ahead, Jonathan, go ahead.
No, I wasn't sure if you were done, so go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about your predictions and how you envision this. I don't see the proliferation of higher ed going in ways that it has been. I don't think it's meeting the mark. And if your call and forward direction for this competency-based education is something that I absolutely agree with, and I think there's many others who do. Also in this notion of upskilling, reskilling, I see a great opportunity for teachers who are accustomed to working in brick and mortar environments to really developing their own digital learning. Mm-hmm. Right, so please jump in.
Great question, and two thoughts came to mind. One's a story, and then one's just the reality of what we're facing. Higher education is a big, giant, heavy animal, and it's not going to want to move because it's so used to the way things have always been done. I think what's going to help move it and help create change is actually a story from my own, like maybe 6 months ago. Okay, my mom is 85 years old, and she struggles with the tablet I gave her and with the smartphone I give her. She's calling me constantly, worrying about, did I hit the right buttons? And I don't know how to do this. And okay. And I take that image and I compare it to a friend who has a child who is 2 years old. Okay. And he was holding that child in his hands the other day when I was talking to him, and that child already had a tablet in his hand and could play games on it. And so I mention that because I really think these up and coming generations are going to be a force to cause those educational institutions to change. Unfortunately, I think they'll resist a little. I don't mean that quite with the word resist, but they'll be slow to react to it. But these new generations will force them to start changing. That's how I kind of see it.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Jodianne, if I can jump in for a minute.
Please do, Gabe.
Teresa, it's good to hear your voice, and I'm so glad you are here. We are enriched by your presence and everyone else's presence. So I just want to mention two things. Number one, I think because this forum, we call it multidiscipline, is to create lateral or horizontal learning. We are all specialists in our fields. And so this is intended to create community so that we speak with our neighbors, meaning people with different disciplines. And so we kind of mix the various disciplines so that we have a horizontal awareness. And to maybe tie to Teresa, as people who are entrenched, tradition, culture, discipline, whatever you call it, as their knowledge and their experience, they have a touch of some other experience. And I feel that is gonna, kind of stir the pot and amazing things happen. And I think we've seen impossible things happen when the pandemic hit. So, all the schools and traditional institutions organizations who function in a face-to-face all of a sudden have to function virtually. And although it was not perfect, we did it. So it's like, in fire department, when there is fire, you just jump, adrenaline kicks in. So with adrenaline, exposure to new things, and most importantly, when customers are fleeing an organization, I think organizations, universities tend to respond to when students kind of flee. When customers flee, it is something they watch. So I'm very hopeful this world we live in, as Bernal mentioned early on, coming together will be aligned and we'll all live happily ever after. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gabe. And I agree with Teresa in the comments. That was lovely. Jonathan, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I as Gabe was saying that, my other thought was, is we can look at something like COVID-19 and what has been inflicted upon the world from a negative perspective, and not to downplay any of that negativity it's had on the world, but also we got to remember that good can come out of bad situations, right? And there's an example of where something has forced us to rethink some things. And when I think about education and all that, it really gave it a bump when you talk about this digital transformation and kind of forcing people to look at what else is possible instead of what we're used to all the time. So that was the thought that came up with what Gabe said.
Thank you for that. Any of our other panelists, any thoughts as we close out? Okay, well, with that, we want to thank you all, our wonderful audience, both those watching live and watching the replay, for joining us for today's multidiscipline webinar. And a special thanks to all of our panelists, our experts, our thought leaders for sharing from their wealth of knowledge on the fourth industrial revolution. We want to invite you all once again to join us on October 21st at noon Eastern Time for the next multidiscipline webinar, which will be part 2 of this thought-provoking series, Writing the Fourth Industrial Revolution to Achieve Prosperity and Peace. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, the fourth industrial revolution represents a fundamental change in the way we live, work, and relate to one another. The speed, breadth, and depth of this revolution is forcing us to rethink how countries develop, how organizations create value, and even what it means to be human. The fourth industrial revolution is about more than just technology-driven change. It is an opportunity to help everyone, including leaders, policymakers, and people from all income groups and nations, to harness converging technologies in order to create an inclusive, human-centered future. And so we invite you to join us to register for these upcoming webinars that you see on your screen at www.icat.net/webinars. You can find the link in the chat where you can register now, and we look forward to seeing you and serving you at the next multidiscipline webinar. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you on October 21st. Take care.